We have come to the end of the lectures. We now look at some past questions. The first question about the December 2013 salt and pepper financials. Before we begin, here are 5 key areas to focus on. Understanding key financial statements. Review the income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statement. Understand how to interpret these financials and how they interrelate. Financial ratios. Be prepared to calculate and analyze key ratios such as liquidity ratios, profitability ratios, and solvency ratios. These ratios help assess a company's financial health. Accounting principles. Brush up on generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP or IFRS, depending on what the exam requires. Be prepared to apply them in different scenarios. Real-world application. Prepare to apply theoretical knowledge to real-world scenarios. This could include assessing the impact of business decisions on the company's financials or analyzing financial statements for red flags. We are going to talk about a question from the December 2013 exam called Salt and Pepper. This question covers the following syllabus areas: obtaining and accepting audit engagements, the engagement letter, and ethics. It is question 4 in the exam and is for 20 marks. Please note that for each mark in the exam, you have 1.8 minutes, and so for 20 marks, you should be spending no more than 36 minutes on this question. It may be worth pausing this video so you can print out the question. That way you can follow the requirements and the scenario as we go through it. The format of this question helps us plan our approach. All the requirements are beneath the scenario, which indicates that the requirements generally relate to the audit firm and client in the information given. We then need to identify what parts of the question require application to the information given. Before analyzing the scenario, it is always worth reading the requirements and ensuring we understand what we need to answer. When it is time to review the scenario, we will have a much better idea of what we're looking for. Firstly, let's look at Part A in isolation. Part A asks to describe the steps that salt and pepper should take in relation to cinnamon. Part 1, prior to accepting the audit, and Part 2, to confirm whether the preconditions for the audit are in place. There are 5 marks allocated for Part 1 and 3 marks allocated for Part 2. Therefore, spending around 14 minutes on Part A before moving on. This part of the question relates to the acceptance stage of an audit, when the auditor considers if there are any reasons not to accept an audit engagement. While understanding the information given in relation to cinnamon is important, the steps taken by an audit firm are standardized, and therefore to answer this question, you will have needed to remember this knowledge from your studies. Part B wants us to state 4 matters that should be included within an engagement letter. To answer this, you will have needed to remember the contents of an engagement letter. This is from your studies, and therefore no application of the information from the scenario is needed. This is a 2-mark question, and therefore no more than around 4 minutes is required. Part C requires your skills to apply the knowledge from the scenario to your knowledge from the studies. It asks you for Part 1 to identify and explain 5 ethical risks, which arise from the above actions of salt and pepper. And for Part 2, for each ethical risk, explain the steps which salt and pepper should adopt to reduce the risks arising. This is a 10-mark question, and therefore no more than 18 minutes should be spent. It states the marks will be split equally between each part, and so equal time should be spent on parts 1 and 2. This requirement is unusual from the standard ethics question we usually see, as it asks for ethical risks and not ethical threats. This broadens the scope for your answer, as not only can you highlight any threats to independence or objectivity given to you in the scenario, but you can also highlight any other ethical issues you might see. It is also unusual, as it does not focus on one client, but the question and the scenario is looking at the general behavior of the audit firm. Careful review of the scenario is needed to pass this question. Let's begin structuring our answers. In Part A, we need to describe the steps that an audit firm should take before accepting a client. For Part 1, we need to identify general steps taken for 5 marks, and therefore 5 things an auditor would do before accepting a client is needed. One of the first things an audit firm usually does when considering a new client is to contact the previous audit firm. This is called professional clearance and involves gaining permission from the client to write to the previous auditors, asking them for any professional reasons why they should not accept the client. Mentioning this would give you a mark in the exam. Another point worth mentioning about professional clearance for another mark would be to ensure you review the response. You should use the content of the response to make your decision on whether to accept. The previous auditors may inform you that there are still outstanding fees, or that information has been withheld from them during their audits. This kind of information is important for you to see if this is the kind of client you want to work with. Salt and Pepper should also consider their knowledge of the directors of Cinnamon. Information should be obtained regarding the behavior and integrity of the directors. Time should be taken trying to get to know the directors before making a decision on whether to accept. If directors' integrity is impaired, it is likely to cause problems for the audit firm and its reputation. Ethics is an important consideration when deciding whether to accept a new client. Auditors must follow the fundamental principles outlined in the ACCA's Code of Conduct. The auditors should also consider if the client could cause them problems remaining independent or objective. In particular, they will be considering if any of the following threats to objectivity are present: self-interest, self-review, advocacy, intimidation, and familiarity. If there is any concern that their ethical behavior could be affected, they should not accept the client. In practical terms, the audit firm should also ensure they are able to do the audit work competently. They should ensure they have the time available to complete the work and should never accept a client where they may not have the necessary skills available to do the work. Taking on a client at a time of year where it is already very busy and using junior staff would always cause problems in the long run and could lead to incorrect decisions being made on the audit, the quality of work being poor or too brief, and the opinion made on the financial statements may be the wrong one. Therefore, for Part 1, our 5 steps could be: sending a professional clearance letter, reviewing the response as part of the decision, consider the director's integrity, ensure ethical behavior will not be impaired, and ensure there is time and skills available to complete the audit properly. For Part 2, we also need to describe steps to confirm whether the preconditions are in place. There are 2 preconditions that should be in place before accepting an audit client. If either are not present, then the engagement should not be accepted by the audit firm. One precondition is to identify if Cinnamon is using an appropriate financial reporting framework. When preparing their financial statements, the auditors must be satisfied that they agree with the basis of preparation so they can audit the financial statements properly. This will depend on the client and the industry that they operate within. Laws and regulations that should be followed by the client should also be considered. The other precondition is whether the directors accept their responsibilities with regards to the financial statements. For example, they must accept that they prepared the financial statements and that they will be free from material misstatements. They will be providing all relevant information and explanations to the auditor. Therefore, if the financial reporting framework is unacceptable to the auditor, and the client has not accepted responsibilities with regard to the financial statements, then this client should not be accepted. For Part B, you will need to remember the contents of an engagement letter. Remember, the engagement letter is an agreement or contract between the audit firm and the client and should be prepared and signed by both parties before the audit work begins. ISO 210 outlines what should be included in an engagement letter. For 2 marks, they require 4 items that should be included. It is clear that these can be stated and therefore no great detail is needed. To help remember some of the contents of an engagement letter, you could use the mnemonic so far. The S is for scope of work. The engagement letter should explain the type of work that will be carried out by the auditor, so the client is aware of what to expect. The O is for objectives. It should explain the purpose of an audit, which is to form an independent opinion on the financial statements, and report on whether they are true and fair and properly prepared. The F is for form and content of reports. The engagement letter should explain how the auditor will communicate during the audit process. The A is for applicable financial reporting framework. The engagement letter should state the financial reporting framework being followed by the client. The R is for responsibilities. 2 marks could be gained here, as you could state the engagement letter should outline the auditor responsibilities and the director's responsibilities. Remember, the auditor's responsibilities include carrying out audit procedures and gathering sufficient appropriate evidence to form an independent opinion on the financial statements. Director's responsibilities include preparing the financial statements properly, reducing fraud and error, and providing information and explanations relevant for the auditor. There are many other contents that could be included, but this mnemonic may help you remember the few that are needed for this type of question. Also, remember no great detailed explanation is needed here, as it is only half a mark for each one. Therefore, just stating each item is perfectly acceptable. Part C is where our skills for applying the scenario to the answer is really needed. It requires us to identify and explain 5 ethical risks, and explain the steps for each risk to reduce it. Half a mark is allocated for each risk identified, and a further half a mark is allocated if you can explain why it is a risk to the audit firm. Then a further 1 mark would be allocated if you can explain what the audit firm should do to reduce the risk. The best approach to structuring your answer would be to head up 2 columns, ethical risk and recommendation to reduce risk. You can then answer all the requirements side by side clearly. This will make it more organized for you, as you are less likely to miss something out. It will also make it easier for the marker to identify and allocate marks to you. Also note that this is an unusual ethics question. It is asked for ethical risks rather than ethical threats. This means that you can identify threats to independence and any other risks to not behaving ethically. The scenario is designed to help you highlight ethical problems that Salt&Pepper will face if they behave the way they propose to. As you analyze the scenario, highlight, underline, and make note of all the ethical problems that are mentioned that you can find. We need 5 to explain, and then thought is needed as to how Salt&Pepper can reduce the ethical risks. 5 that I have selected for this video are: guaranteeing audits will not last more than 2 weeks, free account preparation for the first year of engagement, proposal of an audit fee being based on a percentage of final pre-tax profit, and using junior staff for Cinnamon because it's busy, and not contacting Cinnamon's previous auditors. Salt&Pepper have advertised that their audits will not last more than 2 weeks. This is an unreasonable claim, as each company audit would need varying amounts of time to complete the work properly. Complex audits could not possibly be completed in 2 weeks, and this will leave Salt&Pepper either not being able to do what they said, or cutting corners to complete the audit, and possibly missing material misstatements that need correction. The recommendation should be to not continue with this advertising strategy. Audits should not be advertised in this way, and any clients who have approached them regarding these terms should now be told that the audit will be for the length of time appropriate to the client's circumstances, ensuring auditing standards are followed in the process. Here we can see the two requirements mapped out side by side, with the explanation of the risk on one side and the recommendation on the other. The same approach will be taken for the remaining 4 ethical risks. Salt and Pepper have also offered free accounts preparation for the first year of the engagement. They believe the time spent on preparing the accounts will reduce the time needed on the audit. It is possible that the only way to make a profit on some assignments would be to reduce the level of audit procedures needed and miss something that could change the audit opinion. The recommendation would be to stop offering this free service and ensure that fees are based on the hours needed to complete the audit were it necessary to form an appropriate opinion. One of their clients has proposed that the audit fee be based on a percentage of their pre-tax profit. This may become an incentive to ensure profit is kept as high as possible. This may lead to the auditors overlooking misstatements that would otherwise reduce the profit, and in turn reduce their audit fee. This is a self-interest threat, as it is a factor that could influence decisions made on the audit. The recommendation should be to never accept any contingent fee. Fees should always be based on the estimated hours needed for the client in question. Salt and Pepper plan to use junior audit staff for Cinnamon, the new audit client. This is because they are already very busy and higher skilled audit staff are not available. With any new client, there is a greater detection risk, as knowledge of the client is still being established. Risks may not be assessed properly, and misstatements may not be detected. This could lead to an inappropriate opinion being made. The recommendation should be to ensure more experienced, higher skilled staff are included on the team. If this is not possible at the time planned for the audit, they could discuss whether moving the audit to a quieter point is possible. Salt and Pepper have decided not to contact the previous auditors of Cinnamon before accepting them as an audit client. Contacting the previous auditor or professional clearance would give the reasons as to why Cinnamon are changing auditors in the first place. It could be due to unethical behavior that the previous auditors are not happy with. Therefore, they may be accepting a client that the previous auditors refused to work for. Salt and Pepper should therefore ensure contact is made with the previous auditors to ensure they fully understand the client and any issues that could be associated with auditing them as soon as possible. In summary, our 5 ethical risks and recommendations are: guaranteeing audits will not last more than 2 weeks should now be stopped as it's not possible to audit them properly. Free account preparation for the first year of engagement should be stopped and the fees should be charged for work completed. Proposal of an audit fee being based on a percentage of final pre-tax profit should be declined as contingent fees are not allowed. Using junior staff for Cinnamon because it is busy is not enough for a new client, and more experienced staff should be on the team. And finally, not contacting Cinnamon's previous auditors could mean the client has not behaved ethically in the past, and Salt and Pepper are unaware, which could have been avoided if a professional clearance letter had been sent. In summary, each requirement needs to be answered within the time allocation to give yourself the best chance to complete all the questions. Careful planning of the structure of your answer is needed. Include clear headings to introduce your answer. Structure with columns when the requirement asks for multiple pieces of information, as this all helps improve the speed and efficiency of your answer. Finally, wherever possible, use the scenario. This information has been given to you for a reason, and at F8 they're testing whether you can apply your knowledge to a new situation, and not just whether you can remember the facts from your studies. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you and good luck.